Chief, thank you so much for joining us today. As we discussed, this series, Your Honor, uh, by the Florida Bar, the Center on Professionalism, we're asking a series of uh, wise leaders in the judiciary and lawyers to give us their candid thoughts on where we are today in the profession and in society itself. So we're going to have a candid chat, and I'm so grateful and delighted you can join us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm the honor is all mine to be with you. I got to pinch myself, and then to be following sort of in the series, following behind some of the people you've interviewed. I don't know, I feel like an imposter, but I'm honestly I'm very, very thrilled and honored to be here.
No, it's wonderful. So thank you. So let's begin this way. Can you share with us where you went to high school, college, and law school?
Sure. I actually just returned from it was a COVID belated by a year of my 35th high school reunion. But I was born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut, and I went to middle school and high school at a little private school there called Hopkins. And then from there, I went to Georgetown University for college, my undergrad. And then from there, I didn't take any time off. Sometimes I wish I had. And I went to Fordham University School of Law in New York City. And I worked in New York for a year for a private firm doing criminal defense before I moved to Miami and started working at the public defender's office here in Miami in 1994.
That's really fascinating because, I was practiced in New York for a while, so we'll have to share some thoughts one day about that experience.
Yeah, it was great.
When you came to Miami, you were in the public defender's office, and in high school, college, law school, and public defender's office. Let's start with that category. Were there any particular people that were your mentors or heroes that kind of put you on a certain path where, I mean, today you're the chief judge of the 11th Judicial Circuit, so obviously things went very well and you're in a good spot for all of us. Can you share some heroes or mentors you've had over the time?
Yeah, so especially looking back at my sort of career and my history, I think my earliest heroes are my parents. My parents came here from Iran a few years before I was born. They were both doctors. They got the bulk of their education there, but then they came here to do their residencies. And I think my story is similar to a lot of immigrant stories where I really was raised with, not just the work ethic, but also a real appreciation from both my parents about how lucky I was to be living in this country and all the opportunities that they had, but that they were able to give to my sister and I as a result of being in this country and becoming Americans. Also, above and beyond that, I have a father who, moved here and honestly, in large part, didn't move back. And there were so many aspects of the independence and the freedom of this country, more than even just the opportunity, that my father just relished and always impressed upon me. And when I look back on my earliest memories, I think he's the one who kind of sowed the seeds of, my interest, honestly, in the Constitution and the early history of this country and the differences of this country versus any other. So I give my dad a lot of credit. He also was someone who always championed the underdog. Civil rights was a big topic in my house when I was a little kid. Muhammad Ali was a hero in my family. My father always defended people who were actually exercising their constitutional rights. And I don't know if he knew that that's what he was doing, but that's what he did. And I think that was kind of the seed in my head then. We were also a family that were not, anyone who knows me knows there's no way I could come from, quiet stock. Our family, everything was, debated. Even when we agreed, it felt like we were debating. So then I would say in fifth grade, I had a teacher, Mr. Giannetti, who made me the attorney general of the grade. We had a fifth grade government. And I remember at the time being kind of annoyed, like, why couldn't I be president or vice president? But he made me the attorney general. I'm like, what's an attorney general? And why am I the attorney general? And one of the things he said is, you like to argue, you like to debate. And so that kind of stuck in my head. My grandfather on my mom's side was actually an attorney in Iran. So early on, once I started asking about being a lawyer, that was something that kind of stuck in my head as well, although I really never knew him that well. And so I think those are sort of the seeds of why I decided to ultimately become a lawyer, and why ultimately I definitely wanted to be in the courtroom. I mean, I felt like that's where it was at. And I think ultimately becoming a public defender just fed into, you get to talk about the Constitution, all day, every day. So, that was pretty much the early years. I think that if I had to go back, I think mentorship is so important, and I've been mentored by so many wonderful people, but I don't think I really actively pursued or understood the importance of mentorship, sort of beyond my parents and maybe my teachers, until until I probably started as a public defender at the public defender's office. And then I realized, the importance of it, but also I think it was sort of accidental. I had people that were mentoring me and sort of championing my career, giving me good advice. And back then, like, my first boss at the PD's office was Bennett Brummer, and also David Weed and Rory Stein. Those are sort of like the big three. And notwithstanding the fact that I was a woman, notwithstanding the fact that I was someone who, wasn't necessarily seeking different positions, I think they all kind of cultivated leadership in me. And I did more supervisory stuff and administrative stuff. And that definitely sort of put me on the path to, not just the bench, but, just anything that I pursued, being involved in things. I realized like they really were sort of saw something in me that I don't think I would have seen in myself had it not been for them. And that sort of was an ongoing thing for a while even when I hit the bench. And that's why I'm here. I don't think I would have ever been on this path. I don't think I would have even thought about becoming a judge if somebody else didn't say, hey, why don't you do that?
And I was going to ask you that because when did you first become a judge?
It's been almost 15 years. I got appointed by Governor Christ in 2007. And if you'd asked me, 6 months earlier, are you ever going to be a judge? I would have said, no, I don't think so. I mean, I loved the courtroom. I was trying homicide cases at the PD's office. I was supervising young attorneys and training young attorneys, and I really loved what I was doing. And, one of the life lessons I think I've learned is that if you work hard and you're connected to people, if you make connections along the way, sometimes opportunities come your way, and it might not even be something you ever saw. And so the opportunity and the encouragement to apply for a circuit vacancy came up, and I kind of made the decision. I don't know if this is good to say, but it's the truth. Pretty quickly, like, it was this man. I can't remember who it was. It was actually Judge Perez. George Perez was retiring to go into private practice, and no, I'm sorry. I don't know. I took his bailiff. That's what I did. He retired later. Christina Schumaner. Christina Schumaner, now Christina Pereira Alvarez, she was leaving the circuit bench, and I had known her. I'd practiced in front of her, and she'd also been a public defender also. And she was leaving the bench to go, and she had a Spanish language court TV show. And so her resignation sort of came up, quickly and overnight. And then I was encouraged by some people who I had the opportunity to know, and again, people who kind of mentored, encouraged my career along the way, to apply. And so I spent a few days really like digging deep and thinking, do you want to do this? And one of the things I will say to people is, I don't know that I wanted to necessarily do it right then, but I started saying to myself, well, what if, in 2 years you wake up and you want to do this and you don't have the right opportunity, you don't have the right connections. And at that moment, I kind of had to take advantage of the opportunity that I had at that moment. And I did. And that's kind of the reason I even moved to Florida. I got the job at the PD's office. I moved to Miami. So if you'd asked me as a kid, are you ever going to live in Miami, Florida? I would have said, heck no. If you'd asked me if I was ever going to be a judge, I would have said, I don't know what you're talking about. And certainly as a judge, if anyone had said, hey, are you ever going to be the chief judge? I would have thought, I don't know what you're talking about. So it's been a series of sort of taking advantage of opportunities and listening to people who were encouraging me along the way. That's really been really huge for me, I think.
Chief, it's interesting. All the people I've interviewed for this series have a common thread that you just mentioned, and that is relationships.
Absolutely.
They've all talked about the importance of relationships, and one of the fears that I have is with the pandemic and COVID and everyone just on their phones and texting, etc., there's a loss of the importance of relationships and how impactful that is. Can you share some thoughts on, you've already talked a little bit about relationships, but can you share some other thoughts about that and your concern about where we are today, not people not taking advantage of relationships.
And I agree with you 100%. And I'm trying to be open-minded because I think that the pandemic has definitely shown us a lot of, it has opened our eyes and our minds up to ways of doing things, and in many ways improving, right? Improving access, improving the fact that we can do this right now, without having to drive through the thunderstorm that's currently over Miami-Dade County. So I get it. I really do appreciate all of the benefits that we sort of were catapulted towards because of the pandemic. I don't think we would have gotten to these sort of what we're doing now. I think we would have gotten here eventually, but I don't think we would have gotten here quite as quickly as if it wasn't for the pandemic. But I agree with you. I mean, I think law, not just law, I think a lot of career paths are incumbent upon relationships. But certainly law more than anything else. Like any lawyer will tell you that it's not just about your career, it's also about your success on any type of law you're going to practice is based on relationships, right? Relationships with co-counsel, relationships with opposing counsel, relationships certainly with, the tribunals you appear in front of. And I don't know how we teach the next generation. Because what I've been saying to lawyers that have been and I think we might have had this conversation a little bit in one of the professionalism committee meetings, but I've said to lawyers, when they talk about efficiency and time management and how much more convenient things can be when you're on Zoom, I always respond with, look, jury trials, democracy, all sort of the cornerstones of our country and our Constitution aren't convenient and are not efficient. So we have to be careful, I think, about elevating efficiency and convenience in our practice, in the conversation about justice, above anything else, because justice is still our paramount. That's our mission. I don't care what kind of law you practice. Ultimately, on some level, your role might be different, but ultimately, the ultimate goal of all of us, or the ultimate mission, is achieving justice by doing your job and representing your client and making sure that you fulfill your role. And I think the problem is that so many of us that are the ones who've been in the decision-making capacity about our new practices have been lawyers and judges that have been around for a good long while. So we have the relationships already made. So pivoting from being in person to being on Zoom, I already know you, so it's not as hard. But I think if you're starting from scratch, I see some of the judges that we've had to train, and they've almost never been, not that they've never been in a live courtroom, but so much of what they've done has been being in the courtroom, but with a Zoom screen in front of them. And it's just different. And I think, again, like there's no, we talk about the hallway. There are no hallway conversations anymore, right? Or they're certainly diminished. So I guess I don't really have an answer for you. I definitely share your concern. I think it's a legitimate and very real concern. And I'm not lost on the fact that we're traveling sort of towards a new normal, but I do think we really need to continue to think and not lose sight of the fact that we have a whole generation of lawyers and ultimately judges that have come into this practice during the pandemic, and how do we teach them how to practice? How do we teach them, you had Bob Josephsberg on here. How do they learn how to do the job if they never get to watch someone like a Bob Josephsberg in court, or if they never get to see a Judge Pat Seitz, in person on the bench? I don't know how that knowledge can be captured. Again, I don't want to be closed-minded. I have 3, kids that are in their 20s, and I try to really sometimes recognize that just because we've done things a certain way isn't always better. But the practice of law is something noble. It's so important. The mission of justice is just, I think all of us, it's in our veins if you're a lawyer. And I don't know how you do that without relationships, and I don't know how you cultivate relationships sufficiently the way we have it right now. But again, I think so I leave everyone out there with that question. And actually, when you brought that up, I'm happy, because it's something that I've discussed. I've been on so many seminars, so many different conferences in the last year. And that's kind of what I leave everybody with. Like that, I think it's our job as sort of the older sort of more seasoned attorneys and judges to make sure that we discuss this and that we hand off to the next generation, a practice of law and a justice system that they can still be proud of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've often said that I've told Judge Seitz and Judge Huck and Judge Goodman and Bob Josepher during these interviews, either before or during the interviews, that we're looking to the elders, and I don't mean elders as old people. I mean elders as people that have seen things and are more wise than the average person, and what I would call a modern elder. Someone who has some experience and history that they can share with us. And I'm hoping, and so what you're saying, I totally agree with, and I'm hoping that, put Judge Seitz and Judge Fay, when I interviewed him years ago, always talked about they resolved things at coffee shops. Yeah. After a hearing, they'd walk to the coffee shop across the street from the courthouse, and that's where they resolved matters. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that we can recapture something like that. But I agree with you. I want to move on to another topic now, because there's so much I want to ask you. Okay, it's not rare that we have the chief here to ask these questions. Why is the judiciary such an important part in the balance of power?
So it's so funny because now when when I was talking about my history and how I got here and the people that inspired me. I remember reading the Federalist Papers, and I think I read the Federalist Papers, so many times before I actually became a lawyer. And one time was actually in grade school, and then another time was, I think, once or twice during high school. And I was always so drawn to those principles that I understood, and I still believe are such the framework of our democracy and of our country today, and certainly of the legal system. I think it's about checks and balances. It's about the balance of power. And I think that the judiciary has always been such an important part of that. I mean, it's like a three-legged stool, and it's not going to stand by itself. And I think part of it is to sort of check the power of the executive and the power of the legislature, because they do really have the power. The power of the judiciary is largely just checking, honestly, if it's anything, it's just checking the power of the other two. And it's an interesting, I know we're going to talk about it more as this unfolds, but it always made sense to me. Why did they say that the judges, they were creating the federal system, but why did they say the judges should be appointed for life? They did not want the judiciary to be sort of influenced by the whims of popular opinion, or certainly by the legislature, by the executive. And the executive gets voted by, people vote for the executive and people vote for members of the legislature. So the check on that was to make sure that the judges were sort of independent, that once appointed, they were there and they were going to, call the balls and strikes fairly without feeling any sense of bias. And I think that is, if you look back to the basics, back to the cornerstones of our country, that's what it comes down to. And I think that's why you need the judiciary. I mean, you need them all, but you definitely need the judiciary.
So let's follow that thread then through. Politics, we've become fairly tribal in our nation these days, with everyone taking extreme sides. And as you say, the judiciary is supposed to be above politics. Do you feel that the judiciary is being politicized in any way, or the pressures are on the judiciary by political issues?
Yeah, and I mean, and the honest answer is I don't know that it's so different today than it was certainly when I started or prior to that. I mean, the process to become a judge, whether you run in Florida, is political, and if you're looking for a federal appointment, the process to become a judge is also political. And then once you are a federal judge, even if you're appointed for life and don't have to worry about being popular, for lack of a better word, if your intention is to move up and get elevated, then there's still going to probably be something that you're thinking about, because there is sort of an analysis and dissection of your record that goes on whenever you put yourself out there that lends itself to some political discussion, whether we like it or not. So I don't know that you could ever eliminate politics from at least the appointment process or the election process altogether. But I think certainly there's ways to diminish it. I mean, I think that the founding fathers had something right when they thought about lifetime appointment, right? Because even if the process to get appointed is in any way political, once you're appointed, you can be pure. You can do what what you believe is right, what the Constitution tells you to do, what the law tells you to do, and you can do that without worrying about what's going to happen. obviously I have to be careful how I answer this. I'm not advocating for the, the demise of judicial elections in Florida. But I will say that I think it is a fact that every judge, whether they would admit it or not, in the back of your head, a lot of the time is, is there going to be any kind of political fallout to me when I make this decision, right? Or if I make this attorney angry, is this attorney going to go find someone to run against me? And I will tell you that when I became a judge, Bennett Brummer, my first boss at the public defender's office, sat me down and said, I think you should apply. I think you're going to be great. But, be ready to lose the job. Like, you need to be honest, with yourself. You need to have integrity, and a job's a job, and don't make the job the end all and the be all. And those words were powerful for me. And I really do believe it helped. And I think every person, but certainly every judge, needs to kind of have a small group of, like, the people you keep in your kitchen cabinet that keep you honest. And for me, I have those people. They know who they are. And I look at myself in the mirror, and I have to feel good about what I've done. And has that put me in the crosshairs on occasion? Sure. Have I had the conversation in my head where I thought, whoa, what's going to happen to me now? Sure. But I think that in the end, again, I need to live with myself. I can't live in fear of that. And I've been lucky that I've also, I think a lot of people, if you are a judge and you make your decisions in a thoughtful way and people understand where you're coming from, I think most lawyers go into court, they don't expect to win every motion. They don't expect to win every fight. They don't expect to win every trial. They expect the judges to rule consistently with the law. And I think, thank God we have a lot of those. And I think I've been lucky that I've had that. But my job, I think, as chief, is in part to make sure my judges feel supported and encouraged enough so that they can make their decisions without worrying about that. And there's only so much I can do, but I will tell you, there was one of the questions you were going to tell me you're going to ask was about heroes. Another hero that I have, who I knew who she was, but I didn't know her personally, was Rosemary Barquette, who I've gotten to know much better now, and I love and adore her. But part of the reason I love and adore her was in my first year and a half or so on the bench, I made a decision reducing a sentence of a juvenile on a case that came before me post conviction and post appeal, and I had protesters outside, and it got to be sort of, especially for a new judge, and I was 41 or 42 years old, and somebody showed my kids on Facebook a picture of my face with the big lines. So at the time it was kind of dramatic, and I was heading into my first election cycle too, so there was a lot of nerves. And Chief Judge Farina was my chief, and he called me immediately when he saw the paper and said, "I'm proud of you." And Rosemary Barquette took it upon herself to, through people that she knew that could find me. She called me on my cell phone and she told me, "I don't know you, but I read all these articles, and I want you to know that I'm in your corner, and I'm proud of you, and you're a judge, and you're exercising your discretion in a way that you should." And that meant the world to me. I mean, that meant the world to me. And I think if you're lucky enough to have people like that, especially as a new young judge, sort of be your barometer. And there are people who, like, you say Joe Farina or Rosemary Barquette, and, the whole world in Miami will certainly say, wow. So having those little voices in my head, H.T. Smith is another. Like, those are the people I sort of think about. Okay, what would they do? What would they say? What would they say if I did this? And that's helped a lot. That really has helped a lot. And I think that, in the moment, it's sort of a panic, but thankfully most of us get through it. I think most of the judges ultimately do have the courage to do what they need to do. But again, I guess this is my long way of saying that yes, it's political, and in some ways in Miami for sure it's becoming a little bit more political. And again, to the extent that lawyers out there, especially lawyers in Miami, are watching this, I want them to hear me say it. I'm not hiding behind it. I'm certainly not suggesting that we shouldn't have elections. I think there's good things about elections too, but that is something. Do we want our judges to be making decisions based on law and facts, or because they're afraid of making somebody angry?
Right. No, I agree, and I think that's so well said. In the courtrooms in Dade County, there's a sign over the judge's bench that says something like, "We who labor here seek only truth." What does that mean to you? What should that mean to the judges and the lawyers appearing in that courtroom?
It's so funny because I saw that question and a part of me thought, you know what, should I give Paul a heads up as to what my answer on this is going to be? Because I don't know if other people answer it this way, but I have never liked that sign. And when I pick juries as a lawyer and when I do jury selection as a judge, I don't always bring it up, but I do often bring it up because I think it's important for jurors to understand. I mean, I understand, it's a really nice statement, right? And it's not that on some level we're not all, again, I said that whatever our role is, collectively, we're all doing our role in the interest of justice. But truth and justice, number one, are two different things. One person's version of the truth does not always agree, with somebody else's. And as jurors, it made me sensitive mostly because of jurors, because I was always really intent on making sure jurors felt good about their job as jurors and felt positive about the experience. And I think that the one thing I learned, especially as a criminal defense lawyer, but it's in every aspect of law, the lawyers go into court for days before a trial will start, for years sometimes. And ultimately, what the jurors are going to hear is not everything. And in fact, lawyers on both sides are going to argue to the judge, don't let the jury hear this. Don't let the jury hear that. Keep this out, keep that out, right? So I think a jury can certainly make a good, sound decision based on law and fact. But oftentimes the end of the case, even as the judge, when I'd sat through a whole case and I knew some of the behind the scenes, you don't always get to the truth. You don't always know exactly what happened. So what concerns me about that sign is it gives people this idea that you're going to come up with a verdict and then you're going to come up with the truth. And your verdict may very well be a just verdict, but it may not, you don't know what the truth is. You're not going to have all the facts. So I don't know, and actually, at this point, this has been going on in my life. I've been a lawyer for 29 years now. I should do some research. But again, I think it's a noble idea, but I just think it kind of can throw people off. And I think jurors in particular, when they come into court and they see us at sidebar, they know there's these conversations going on when they're not around, they kind of want to know what else is going on. And they don't always agree. And the general public doesn't always understand why do we not let you know that, this person had this history or that they sued this person before? We keep all that out because we're really trying to make sure the process is fair. But to regular people, I mean, even my family, my parents are doctors, my sister's a doctor, they're all super smart. The amount of conversations I've had with them about our legal principles and stuff that they don't understand or don't agree, how can you keep that a secret? So I think that's kind of why I get hung up on that sign. But I do, in the sense that we are all here on the mission for justice, I think that I agree with. And I think that the jurors have a job, the judge has a job, and the lawyers have the job. And their roles are different. Their roles are distinct, but taken all together collectively, then ultimately I think we who labor here are seeking the truth. Maybe that is the collective goal. But I like to think of it as justice. I would love, if somebody could let me, if I was queen, I would say we who labor here seek justice.
Well, and I really appreciate that. So let me follow up with that. Let's talk about professionalism here, since we're with the Center on Professionalism with this Your Honor series. You and I have talked about this a little bit, the concept of passive injustice, that if someone's in a position of power or authority, like a judge, and bad behavior is going on in front of them, and they don't do anything about it, they let the bad behavior continue, that the judge, to some extent, is engaged in passive injustice, that they're letting the bad stuff take place. When there's bad behavior by lawyers in the courtroom, what do you expect your judges to do? What do you think their response is?
Gosh, and so I think this is it's, on one hand, it's a simple idea, right? But I think that the reason we have committees devoted to this, the reason the Supreme Court, deemed that we need to have committees devoted to this is because it's not easy, it's complicated. And it's funny, I was watching your interview with Judge Seitz, and she had that little squishy thing, and she would take them sidebar and like squish the little thing. And I'm like, oh my God, that's a great idea. And I think when I thought about what she did, I think, when you're in the midst of people losing their tempers, That's almost easier. I think most judges find that, like when people's passions get to be out of control, yeah, you take a little break, take a time out, breathing, take a breather, and everyone kind of get back into, go back into your corners and let's regroup. The unprofessional behavior, I think it gets problematic. And I think there's a couple things at play. I think one thing is that, and I remember this even as a lawyer when you're talking about lawyers behaving badly. And listen, it's also an issue with judges behaving badly, right? Because we are a body that in large part gets to self-police. And, it's easy to say in the abstract, oh, that's bad behavior. That person needs to be referred to the bar, or that judge needs to be referred to the Judicial Qualification Commission, or this person needs to be fired. When you're actually the person who has to do that, it becomes more difficult, right? Because this, and again, in Miami, as big as we really are a kind of tight community. You get to know everybody. So you might know there's bad behavior. You might know that this person should be sent to the bar, but then you're thinking, oh my gosh, he's, this lawyer's been around for this long and has a family or has this, and it's their livelihood. So the good news is I do think we think long and hard about acts like that. The bad news is I do think it turns it into us really tolerating more than we should. And sometimes someone's a good person, but they just have these habits in court that are bad. And I think that, you can do everything you can. I think most of the judges, like sometimes we try to get together, we'll talk to somebody, there's like these interventions, and we tend to do everything we can other than filing a bar complaint. Because we don't want to do that. And that's why I think the local professionalism panels are wonderful, because it's a stopgap, right? And it's short of setting the person to the bar, and it's a collective. There's not just one person that they're gonna investigate, and then they sometimes can make the determination. But I mean, again, I don't know, and hopefully our local professionalism panels can be used even more. But it's a great question. I don't know, and I'll tell you the flip side. I'm going to kind of put it back to the lawyers, because I know lawyers. Lawyers want you to refer lawyers, want the judges to refer lawyers, but also the judges sometimes come to me, and the same thing happened when I was the administrative judge in the criminal division, and they would complain about a judge. And that's tough too, right? Because the lawyers don't want to go on the road. I'd always say, well, can I talk to this judge and tell them that you and I spoke? No, judge, I don't want them to know. And I think part of what I think the lawyers are worried about is sometimes is it retaliatory behavior from the judge, which I will say to them, what's the judge going to do? What can they do? They have to follow the law. There's an appeal. But there's still that idea, whether it's a myth or whether it's a reality, that the judge will somehow, take it out on you or your client or your future clients, if they know that you've complained about them. Again, I don't know that there's any real proof of that, but that's the fear. And the fear sometimes on the judge's part is like, am I going to get myself into hot water if I ultimately take this, lawyer to the bar? So the cases we see where somebody gets referred are usually pretty extreme, right? So it takes really bad behavior. So I don't think we should let it get to that point. And I feel like I'm doing the same thing I did in the last question, where I'm kind of leaving you with, here's, I'm answering questions with questions. I don't know exactly what the answer is. I think that as much as we can encourage each other to have these discussions, I think there should be conversations, to the extent that a judge or somebody can speak to a lawyer and call out their behavior and explain to them why it's not okay. But I think we also, most of us know that the good news is that there are very few bad actors, but there's some that are just not going to ever be responsive to anything sort of short of a bar complaint. And I think to the extent that we can get ahead on those, it would be great. But I don't blame somebody for feeling reluctant, because I know, especially in my position now and the position I had before this, and it's not easy to be the heavy. And when people come to me, I just had one of my judges say on the phone to me, you're the chief, you can do whatever, you can move people wherever you want. Yeah, technically it's true. I can put a judge in any division I want to, right? That's the administrative rules. And in some jurisdictions, they do that because they're very small. But I'm not going to do that just because I can, because it's not right. And so I think that's what's hard. I think it's not easy when you're the person who actually has to make the move. And I think that's why we see it here. And I mean, honestly, my curiosity would be, is this a problem in other jurisdictions, certainly in other, I guess I would say other jurisdictions comparable to Miami, right? Like, do the judges and lawyers in New York City, are they having similar conversations where they don't know how to curb, bad behavior? And then the other problem I think ends up being sometimes you have people that are powerful for whatever reason, whether they're lawyers or judges, and they, tend to get away with more because they're in positions of power and influence, and then no one wants to call them out.
Right, right. No, no. You know, I know the questions are short, but that doesn't mean it's not complicated responses, because these are complicated issues, because we're dealing with human nature.
Yeah. I
And
will say this. I think your involvement, the creation of the local professionalism panels, but the committees, I think has really helped. I mean, it's certainly, and I think my job, and the one thing I will say that I saw from Chief Judge Soto and from Chief Judge Farina, who both mentored me tremendously, is I do think my job, that's not the end all and be all, but I do think I need to be able to support judges and lawyers in their effort to kind of curb bad behavior and increase professionalism. And I think, listen, again, I think we lead by example too. So there's that. But what do we do about the bad apples? I think is going to sort of be an ongoing issue.
yeah, no, I agree with you. Let me switch here a little bit and ask some other questions that I've been dying to ask you. All right. Do you have faith in the system?
Yes. That's my short answer is yes. And actually, when you ask me, I would say yes, I would say absolutely, I would say 100%. I will not lie that today, in this day and age, for the first time, I'm 54, I've been a lawyer for 29 years. I'm a little shakier than I thought I would be at this stage of my life. Given everything that's going on in the world. I have concerns. I look out the window and I see, on one hand of Miami is thriving and growing, and, there's so much money being spent here on development. And on the other hand, our homeless problem is getting worse. And I see, people with mental health issues not getting the services they need. And, and I have we have staff who work in the court system who cannot afford to live in Miami. So there's a lot of, so I'm worried. I definitely have worries. And I think that our democracy is sort of being tested and shaken. Certainly, I don't recall a time in my life where I've ever felt like our sort of foundation has been, weakened in any way. And right now, I worry about that a little bit. That being said, I think most of the time, I think I have so many reasons to be faithful. And I think one of those is I tried, 100 cases almost as a judge, 100 cases in jury trials. And I had probably close to 100 felony trials when I was a lawyer, jury trials. And I think people always say, oh, did the jury get it right? And as a judge, the beauty is you get to always speak to the jurors afterwards. And I will say, honestly, there have definitely been times where they may not have used the right reasons, or maybe it wasn't the instructions that I painstakingly gave them weren't necessarily followed. But I really do believe that in most of the situations, if not all the situations, very few did the jury not get it right. And there's something about that has always given me just peace. And I think the other thing that's always given me sort of, I guess, faith is that whatever else is going on in the world, there are people out there like you who are working hard still to improve everything. And I think you don't have to look far to see people doing really good things. And I think as long as I see that, I have faith, but I really do. I mean, I think our justice system is wonderful, and in Miami, my God, we have issues. We have, our infrastructure, the courthouse is 1 million years old. We have, infrastructure that should certainly have been updated a long time ago that we're working on updating now. But everyone here is part of the system, really works hard, and we get it. I think most of the time we get it right. Most of the time things go right. And I think that sort of, I guess, is the foundation of my faith.
Great. Let me then ask you this question more on the running of the court and your role as chief judge. I've used the phrase process over purpose. There are so many cases that the judges are handling. And I know even Judge Seitz made a comment about having to close cases out at certain times of the year. And I know the judges are under great stress with all the caseload. My concern is I'd love you to address the concept of dealing with all those cases, all those pressures, moving it along, and yet still the purpose, as we've discussed, getting to a just result in the case. How do you balance that? I'd love you to just share your thoughts.
So, I mean, caseloads have been an issue certainly since I started as a judge. And I remember as a lawyer, it was an issue as a lawyer. And your goal, your ultimate goal as a lawyer or a judge is you want to close your cases out, right? You want to be working efficiently. That being said, I mean, I think most lawyers know, and certainly most judges know that, like I kind of started with this, justice, democracy, the Constitution, these are not efficient bodies, right? So jury trials are not efficient. And no one's ever going to say we shouldn't have jury trials, right? None of us. But that's not efficient. What's efficient is settling. Settling is really efficient. So I think as much as our caseloads need to be, at a certain point, if you have a very high caseload, that becomes a lack of justice too, right? Because people are not going to get hearings timely, they're not going to get access timely. I think it's a balance. I think it's always been a balance. And I think most of the time, I think most judges understand that as quickly as they want to work, as much as they want to close the case, they have to balance that up against what the result is going to be. Number one, I think Judge Seitz was talking about one of her colleagues who said, the appellate court will check me if I'm wrong. And that is ultimately the truth, right? The appellate court can look and see. But in a lot of situations, like if it's a settlement or if it's a plea deal, like if you're in the criminal division, there's not going to be an appellate process. And you do have the power and influence to push something and close it out. And you just really have to, again, kind of have that little voice in your head saying, is this right? Am I doing what's right? And the lawyers are there. Like the lawyers are there to safeguard. And I think the lawyers are there to, sort of stop the freight train. If the freight train is out of control and the freight train being the judge, if the judge is like, we need to close, the lawyers have the ability to stand up and say, no, judge, we can't do that. And I think in Miami, again, I'm really proud of our lawyers and our judges because I think we all kind of work together on that and they understand where the other people are coming from. And I think the other thing is, listen, the one thing I'm proud of everything we do here. I think our caseloads are definitely, under all the circumstances, for the most part, pretty reasonable. We're never going to be accused of closing out cases too fast, at least not in my lifetime. Like, I just don't think that's been an issue. I don't think our cases are necessarily open in an inordinately long period of time. But when you compare us, certainly when I go to like statewide meetings, our closeout rate is good. Most of our judges tend to close out as many as are coming in. But which means that you're working efficiently, right? Like your closeout, we call it the clearance rate. But in other jurisdictions, their cases tend to last a shorter period of time. And I think part of that is their volume. And part of that's probably just the nature of the practice there too. Like we have some of the best lawyers in the world here in Miami. They're not going to let you close out that case until the case is ready to be closed out. So I do think there's a balance. I think that for the most part, unless there's maybe there's an anecdote here and there where things, where justice sort of got subsumed by efficiency. But I think for the most part, day to day, the judges and the lawyers are working sort of together to know kind of know what the low hanging fruit is that they can close out quickly, and to know there's certain cases that are going to be sticking around for a while. And it just is what it is.
Okay. I think you're absolutely right. It's finding that sweet spot, that balance. I've talked, especially with Judge Seitz, and I'd like to share it with you, the concept of the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is, small changes that either judges or lawyers can make to make the judicial system move a little smoother, make your job easier. No major shift, but over time, the small changes have an impact. Are there any small changes, butterfly effect type concepts that you see for the judges in your circuit, or you recommend to some lawyers to help the judges along in the cases that you could share with us?
So, I mean, sort of concretely, I think there's one example that came up today is we're now with the advent of Zoom and all this remote work we're doing, the way we're getting notices to people, like we're getting, everything was mail. I mean, there's, statutes and rules devoted to mail, right? Because you had to mail or you had a process server handing stuff to people. And what we're realizing now, and the clerk started an e-notify system prior to COVID that really was important during COVID. And we're hoping to make it even more, more user friendly and have it, used more widely, because even people who are poor and don't have access these days, almost everyone has a smartphone. So that's one small little tweak where we can start adjusting, realizing that notice should be electronic as opposed to in the mailbox, because people don't check mail. The younger generation definitely doesn't check mail. And a lot of the people that need access to our court system are sort of transient. So they don't always live in the same place, for a while. And if we want to increase their involvement in court and give them access, et cetera, that to me is a small little tweak that can really have over time, a really big effect, because you're going to, you won't have as many warrants in the criminal system and you'll have more adherence, et cetera, and, all the other divisions. When I saw that, I kind of think of it, a couple things. So in my world, I always refer to it as the starfish story, and the starfish allegory, I guess, which is that, the two people are walking on the beach and there's a bunch of starfish, washed up, and one person starts throwing the starfish back in, and the other one says, what are you going to do? What are you doing? You're not going to make a difference. There's like thousands of starfish here. And the other one says, well, I just made a difference to that starfish. And that's an allegory that I was taught very early on by my supervisor, my initial boss at the PD's office, Steve Harper, when I was in the juvenile division, because especially when I was young and fresh out of, law school, et cetera, it was overwhelming when you'd see so many people suffering and you're helping this one client. It was hard. Or when you couldn't help all your clients, you'd have a success with this one, but then another one you wouldn't. And he gave us all that story. And it's funny that it's something that I've been teaching my kids now all the time. And I think when you talked about having faith in the system, that's kind of what I come back to sometimes too, is sometimes you have to focus on the person that's in front of you as a judge or as a lawyer, and like the help you've given to that person, and not get bogged down by everything in the world. I think right now I watch the news and it's overwhelming. So when I see, when the news does highlight a positive story or someone doing a positive thing, I take heart in that, because I'm like, okay, there's a starfish that was saved. So I kind of just feel like, in addition to the butterfly effect of coming up with a tweak that could help, you don't know whether it's a small effect or a profound effect of when you help one person. And I think lawyers, more than so many, other professions, we have the ability and the opportunity to help people every day, whether it's just asking the person who looks confused on the street, hey, where do you need to go? Which happens all the time downtown, where people don't know where to go, which courthouse, or where they haven't, or it's like, let me help you maneuver this, or let me help you navigate this legal problem you have when you're a pro se litigant. So, help and save as many starfish as you can in your day, in your month, in your life. And I think over time that has a pretty profound effect.
No, I agree completely. Believe it or not, we've been going about 50 minutes already, and there are just a couple of questions left I want to get your thoughts on, because it's just wonderful to talk to you. Clearly, you have a strong moral code. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, how do you live a positive legacy from day to day? How do you keep your balance? Because you are in the center of the hurricane. You're the eye of the hurricane.
So I think that I'm lucky in my life that for the most part, especially my parents, I was raised by parents that are both generally optimistic people. I mean, pretty positive people. Because as I look at, again, like I'm in sort of the midlife stage, you sort of look at what your undercurrents are. And I think part of that's because I don't, before I could talk, before I could understand words, my parents were hammering into my head that I need to be grateful. And that was huge. And I'll give my mom, both of them really did it a lot, but my mother for sure. And I think it's because, again, they came to this country and I think they wanted to make sure that we didn't take anything for granted. And it's part of the Persian culture, I think, too. Like my mother has this whole, my mother, again, a doctor, she's a scientist, but, you don't want to bring the evil eye upon yourself. So there was a lot of warding off the evil eye. But her method of warding off the evil eye was in large part being grateful, and also in large part being giving to people less fortunate, thinking about people who are less fortunate. And it's funny because she almost thinks of giving. My mother's idea of giving is almost like a selfish act, because I think she feels like I'm giving to you, but now the evil eye is off me. And I really think that, those lessons you learned as a little kid become sort of part of your ingrained in your DNA. And I think for me, that's always been a thing where I remember I would come home with a good report card and she'd be donating money to some, a needy family, either back in Iran or in New Haven where we lived. And I remember thinking, well, my friend down the street got a good report card, and she got a toy or she got ice cream. And in my family, what's going on? And I did the same thing with my kids a lot, where I would have, birthday parties and tell them, okay, we're not going to get gifts for this birthday party. We're going to like donate. Or I would ask people like, please no gifts. If you insist, donate. And when they were little, they would look at me, like my daughter in particular was like, this is dumb. Like, why are we doing this? And now that they're, sort of budding young grown-ups, I think they understand what the lesson is and why. And I think that if you sort of live your life like that, even when there's bad things that happen, and my family's had their share. I mean, my sister is a ovarian cancer survivor. My father currently is in the midst of Alzheimer's disease. So when I was married, my father-in-law, lovely, incredibly human being, died suddenly, like when I was right before my daughter was born. So when I think in this grand scheme of my life, it's not that nothing bad has ever happened. It's that I'm lucky that I've been surrounded by people who we always kind of still come back. Like the center point is gratitude and feeling lucky and blessed. And I think again, like when I think of H.T. Smith, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with H.T. where he hasn't started with, how are you? I'm blessed and life is good. And if someone like that and everything he's seen and lived through in his life, and some of the stories he tells are just incredible stories, and just painful stories. If he can go through all that and still look me in the face and every day of his life say, I'm lucky, I'm blessed, and mean it. I mean, you can tell when he says it, he means it. Then, who am I to say? Same thing with Justice Barkett. And, there's other people like that who've been fighting these fights for such a long time and have lived through, some serious, tough times and are still smiling and still positive. So I think that those are the people that I sort of look to when I'm feeling low. But I am lucky also to just be surrounded by friends and family, and the friends that are my family that generally, none of us is super tolerant of self-pity or sadness. So in my family in particular, like which is bad. I've had to learn with my kids because my daughter's like, Mom, let me just feel the feels. I'm like, okay, feel the feels. Then suck it up and get up and move on. Right. So I think that's definitely the culture I grew up with. It was definitely the mother I grew up with. And so I try to soften myself a little bit. But at the same time, I do think that that's, for the most part, the people that I get to interact with daily, who are my friends and my family, we are living so well and so privileged. And I think if you look around in this world, you don't have to look far to see people who are not as lucky. And I think to waste time, not being positive and not being optimistic is just, it's just, don't waste your time doing that, and look back and see the people that are less fortunate and do what you can to help them.
I agree. I have one last question for you, and you've answered part of it, but I want to see if you want to expand upon it at all. And that is, if you were to write your younger self a letter now with the lessons you've learned, what would you like your younger self to know? And obviously that means, what do you want the younger generation or the young lawyers, young women lawyers, young male lawyers, whoever coming up, what would you like them to know from that letter you would write to your younger self?
I would say to my younger self, number one, number two, number three, through number 100, it's going to be okay. I would tell, and I try to tell young lawyers, especially young women, because I feel like when as a young woman and as an attorney, I had a working mother as an example, but I feel like I didn't have a whole lot of, that's why I admire people like Pat Seitz or Edie Osman, people like that who I know now better, but I can't imagine like some of the stuff that they had to contend with as young women in this profession. I think it's so much easier for me now. But when I was first starting out, there weren't a lot of women who were sort of, killing it the level of all the men and still raising a family. So I would just tell them it's going to be okay. I think that, people, lawyers, and then women on top of that tend to be, these perfectionists. And I think in this era now of social media in particular, you look at Instagram and you're like, wow, everyone lives this amazing life where they're, everything's so perfect. And I think that that's the problem with social media, honestly. But I think that I definitely want to be honest as much as I can about my own existence, because there definitely have been difficult moments, and there have been moments where I felt like I was failing miserably. And I tell that to people all the time. If and when you're having that moment where you feel like you're failing at everything, call me up. on your call. But I think the beauty, again, of being at this stage of life is you realize that life is truly, a roller coaster. And that's what I'm trying to teach my kids now. Like, there's a low moment, there's a high moment, there's the flat moments. You got to just ride it all out. None of those moments are going to last forever. So enjoy those highs, ride out the lows, and, find the beauty and peace in like the flat zone. But that's it. Like, it's up and down. And then I think also, just if you are lucky enough to have joy in your life, like it or not, the flip side of that is it's not going to last forever. There's going to be a moment where that joy is over. And then, then there's whatever, a little lull until the next joy. But I just think just telling people it's going to be okay. The stuff that you get worried about and bogged down with when you're young, it's all a matter of perspective. And that's what I hate always telling people who are younger, just wait, because I didn't love being told that. Because when you're young, especially you're a young lawyer, like, my kids look at me now and they're 22 and 24 and they seem to think that they know everything. And I don't condescend about it, but I just say to them, look, like it or not, like I said, compare yourselves at 22 to when you were 12. Don't you know more than you did when you were 12? So, your brain, even though I guess they say our brain stops developing at 25, I feel like your brain keeps developing. Because I feel like every decade, and I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, my brain is such a better brain today than it was, a decade ago. And I think it's just really keeping things in perspective. And I think that's probably what I am attracted to in, the H.T. Smiths of the world and the Rosemary Barquettes of the world. Like, they're ahead of me, so I can look and see their highly developed brains, and I can see their peace and their calm, even in the face of, adverse circumstances. And it fuels me. That's my life force. But yes, me to young Nushin, I would say it's going to be okay.
Judge, Chief, all I can say is that the 11th Judicial Circuit and the community is in good hands with you as Chief.
Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful that you've joined us and shared your thoughts, and I thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to you. Thank you to the bar. And I just want to say that, it's not corny. It's the truth. My greatest honor, honestly, probably of my life, is to be here in this position and represent the 11th Judicial Circuit. And the lawyers and the judges and our legal community is really, especially in the last 2 years, I could not be prouder of this community. And I thank you so much for highlighting that and giving me the chance to speak with you, but to share that as well.
Thank you, Judge. Chief Judge, be well.
Thank you, you too.